Melody Moko is a Golden Guitar winning singer-songwriter, and songs from her last album, Two Kids and a Radio, won QMA Awards and were nominated for the Australian Music Prize. She now has a wonderful new album, Suburban Dream, and I'm really excited to talk to her about it. Hi, Melody.
Hello.
It's great to talk to you about this album because it's very thoughtful. It's lyrically rich without being dense, which is quite something to pull off. But I want to talk about lots of things in the album. I'm just going to start, though, by asking you if the writing of Suburban Dream came about just after you released Two Kids and a Radio, or was there some lag time, or were things bubbling around for a while?
There was definitely some lag time. So because Two Kids and a Radio, I wrote that record over a period of about 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a lengthy period, I think, of writing, and a lot of different things had happened. But then with Suburban Dream, I wrote Two Kids and a Radio. I had a baby. I put Two Kids and a Radio out, and I barely had time to do anything in the way of writing for a really long time because I was on the road. I was playing a lot. I was being a mum. I was doing all the things, and writing was the furthest thing from my head at that time. I just didn't really feel like I was in that space.
Mm-hmm.
But then after the birth of my third child, we took some time off to just, really to connect with the baby and to be a mum. And that was all really, really wonderful and beautiful. But I did get pretty antsy pretty quick, quicker than I thought I would. So we jumped back on the road, and then we were trying to manage 3 kids, a new baby, and intense touring. And so I ended up getting really, really unwell. My mental health ended up failing, and I got postnatal depression quite late in the piece. My third daughter was 9 months when I started realizing that that's what was going on. And it was pretty intense because I have suffered with depression before, but this was like all-encompassing depression. I couldn't really do anything except lay in bed. And so in that time, the thing that kind of helped me recover from that was discovering writing again. So my husband had actually said to me, maybe, I know you don't feel like you can do much, and it's fine that you can't play shows, and we're here to support you, but maybe you should use this time to write down your feelings and write some songs. Maybe this is the time that you need to do that. So I did. I started writing, and all of the songs that I wrote for this record happened within about a month, apart from 1 or 2 that I wrote right at the end. But the bulk of the album happened in that time. So it was all like a really intensive period of writing, and I didn't do any co-writing apart from with my husband.
Right.
Yeah, all just me, and very cathartic. So it's good that you say that you don't feel like it's too dense, because sometimes I worry.
It's not at all. I think partly because your motivation as a songwriter is also as a storyteller. That's been clear in your songs in the past. This is not a new movement for you. I think you are a clear communicator, and that carries through to whether you're on stage, because I've seen you performing live and you really connect with the audience. So I often think that clear communication in lyrics stems from that primary motivation to want to connect. And if you're doing it in performance, then you're usually going to do it in writing as well.
And I think for me, in that time when I was suffering with mental health, I didn't feel I could communicate that very well in speaking, not even with a psychologist or with my friends or with my husband. So I think that putting it into music was the only way that I was going to heal, because I needed to communicate it. And this was the way that I knew how to communicate best.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that you couldn't even really say it to a psychologist, because I know someone who'd been through a great personal trauma who just said, look, talk therapy's crap, basically. Like it doesn't work for everyone. There's a lot of pressure to do it, and it doesn't necessarily work. I mean, I'm interested in how for you art and creativity actually brought you out of what you've described as a rock bottom place. There's a quote you gave about the album where you said that the depression did take you to a rock bottom place and then you brought yourself out of it. And clearly art has been the way to do that.
Yeah, 100%. And I'd tried talk therapy before, and I kept wondering why it wouldn't work, like why it wasn't working for me. Like, why can't I get better? Like, this is what you're meant to do. You're meant to go and see a psychologist. You're meant to talk to someone professional. And it just all felt so cookie cutter to me, like so generic, the way that they were dealing with it. And I should have realized that I'm not a cookie cutter human, and I communicate differently maybe from other humans. And so yeah, I needed to write these songs. So it really is it feels quite like a journal to me of the things that were going on in my head and my life at the time.
Mm-hmm. And the title of the album is also the title of the song on the album. And it's certainly, when it's the song, it's an ironic title because you're talking about the Suburban Dream. Although I do think there's a dreamlike quality to these songs, in the sense that you as the artist are with us but not, and you're vividly coloured but slightly hazy, if that makes sense. And I'm wondering if when you were writing, because you said a lot of these songs came at quite a quick pace, whether you felt like you were observing yourself doing it to an extent.
Yeah, I did feel like that. I definitely did feel like that. And I think it's funny because the dream element to it feels that way to me too, because when I was in that state, as in when I was deep in the depression, I definitely didn't feel like myself.
Right.
And so I think I did feel like that was a time that I was like living a completely different, like I was observing what was going on in my life rather than participating with what was going on in my life. And maybe being in that state and being more of an observer and less of an intense participator, because I'm an intense participator of life normally, maybe that made it easier for me to write about my experiences. Like, I was watching rather than doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I hadn't thought of that.
But also because in listening to music and trying to articulate it for other people as I do, I was thinking, what is happening here? It's like I feel like Melody's right in front of me and she's super brightly coloured and these stories are really vivid, but also it's not you holding us at a distance. It was just that sense of a bit of haze. And so that was what I thought it meant, that you had been able to stand back and observe, which is not easy to do either, to see yourself objectively and see your own story objectively, because you have to resist getting too bogged down in your own feelings in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yes, 100%. But I think that's maybe what makes it, what made writing this album a healing process for me rather than just a catharsis of like, blah, 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 this is all the things that I'm feeling. I wasn't wallowing in it. I was trying to get better. So I had to step back and observe what was going on from more of an objective point of view than just sit in my emotional state, which is what I had been doing, sitting in my emotional state.
Right. You are an unflinching documentarian, I think, of your own life experiences, but also of life in general, and that's been clear on the past couple of albums too. But I'm wondering if that takes a constant commitment to be brave in your art and about yourself, because you don't flinch, or at least it seems that you don't flinch from the realities of life.
It definitely takes work for me to be this brave with this record particularly. I didn't really feel like the last record was all that brave or confrontational, or not confrontational, but I didn't really feel like the last record really took that extra step in bravery. I really just, maybe because I'm generally quite an open, honest person and with my views quite strong, I didn't feel like that record did it. But this record definitely, consistently every day that I think about this record, it scares me. It scares me how honest this record is for my own ego. It scares me how honest this record is for some of the subjects that I've taught. Some of the subjects that I've broached in this record are scary. And yeah, I actually just got off a phone call before we did this interview about a particular song on the record and a particular word in a song on the record. And the person I was speaking to was questioning whether that was a smart decision for me to be putting it on the record. So I'm constantly being questioned.
Well, there were no words that leapt out to me that seemed out of place, I've got to say.
Yeah, no, not out of place. Everything's in context. That's the thing. And I think I keep reminding myself that, it is about a particular, a narration of a particular time and in life, and also a particular place, all of the things. And so it's not you know, it's not always going to be pretty. And I don't want to make music that everybody thinks is pretty and perfect and everybody loves, because it wouldn't be honest.
Well, except I'd actually say that music that's not pretty and perfect can be music that everyone loves, because it's relatable and because the specifics of your experience can be universal in that way. And partly what's so interesting about this album is that you document in some parts of it disappointment, which is actually not something that gets covered a lot, maybe because it's not seen as too riveting a subject, and it's not as if you directly say, oh, I've found aspects of life disappointing. It's basically you showing us, not telling us. But that's something that we all experience every day and have to manage in all sorts of ways when people let us down, when circumstances let us down, when we've had expectations, which is usually the cause of disappointment. So I was listening to it thinking, yeah, I can feel this. I can hear you documenting disappointment, but I don't feel that you're disappointed now. So when you were recording it, again, that sense of distance from it, you're like, I was disappointed then, but I'm making this art out of that, and I feel good about this art.
Wow, that is so interesting, because a few people have actually said that now, that it feels hopeful, this record.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas for me, I found that quite confusing when people have said that. I was going, oh, but it feels really dark to me, this record. And they're like, no, it's not dark. It's not a dark record. And I'm like, oh, but it's a sad record. And they're like, not really a sad record either, like a hopeful record. Like, so it's interesting. Now you're the third person to say that very thing about it. And it does make me look at it differently. I think because when I wrote it, it was that period of time for me. Anytime the songs or sing the songs, I feel put back there, or at least I'm observing myself maybe in that space.
Right.
And so it feels a little more dark to me, but I guess it's good that it didn't come out that way.
Yeah, I think it's a pragmatic record in a lot of ways. So therefore not dark, not necessarily light all the time either, but realistic about being human. Now, the latest single is Jesus Year, and there's a line in that, are you surprised that I'm still here? And I'm wondering if you're surprised that you're still here.
Yes. And that line is quite multifaceted. I think when I wrote it, it was more literal, because I wrote this song a little later in the process. It was probably one of the last songs I wrote, and it was definitely when I'd come out the other side of the time that I was going through. And when I was in that space and time, I remember having this realization. I was putting washing in the washing machine, and things were all going on upstairs around me, and I was so frustrated and feeling so like I didn't know. I was hopeless. I was completely hopeless at the time. And I had this thought in my head that I understand how people could feel like their families would be better off without them. And I'd never, ever been able to understand before. And I'd been really sort of closed-minded with the suicide idea. And I'd always thought, oh, how selfish. How could somebody possibly ever do that to their family? Mm-hmm. But in that moment, I realized how you can get to a place where you really, truly feel inside that people would be better off without you.
Right.
And that's where that line initially had stemmed from. That I was really surprised that I did make it through that period of time. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it can also be read as someone surprised that you're still here creating music. It's not easy creating music, even. Just to look at it, if we just look at the post-pandemic reality of music, but also being a woman in music and getting on the road, and there's that reading of it too, I think.
Mm. And that reading is not wrong either. Like, well, I mean, no reading of any lyric is wrong, but that lyric is also relevant. I think, like, when you write things, I find when I write things, I feel like they mean one thing. And then, like, later on, I'll listen again and go, actually, I think I meant that. Or actually, I also mean this, this, and this. And so I love it when people say, well, I got this from it, because I'm like, yeah, that is something that I mean too, because I'm so manic. My head is so, like, I have ADHD, so I'm definitely, like, all over the place. And even when I write, sometimes it's just this crazy process that I actually have to step back later and go, what is this about? What is that about? So maybe I'm drawing wrong conclusions sometimes, or maybe there's lots of conclusions to be drawn.
Or maybe it's your subconscious giving different context to everything. That's why there are multiple readings. And part of you're talking about your process in writing songs, I'm also interested in the push and pull of you as an artist having having a family and the structure that's needed for that. And then also, as you often talk about, a wilder part of yourself, and I don't mean wild as in dancing on tabletops naked, but that's perfectly fine too. It's more that like the wild nature, I think, that is in everyone, but which is often sublimated in a suburban dream context. But do you find that push and pull is actually a tension that's good for art?
Yes, it's definitely a tension that's good for art. If we look at this record, I think that, you know, this is what the entire record is kind of based around, that tension. But it's a constant struggle. I would be remiss to sit here and say, you know, that it's an easy road to walk, to be the kind of wild, free-spirited human that just wants to sit in the forest and write songs. And then to have 3 kids that live a very structured life. Like, my kids aren't home, aren't on the road with us all the time. My kids, we don't live in the bush. We live in Logan, in suburbia, and my kids go to a Lutheran school. Like, it's all really structured, the life that's around me. The structure around me and around my kids is intentionally quite rigorous at this point, because if we didn't have that, I wouldn't be able to, like, sometimes you need structure around you to be able to have space to be that wild creative. Yeah, but that's only something that I've learned how to do from trial and error, and, you know, and after the 3rd child, I finally feel kind of finding a balance sometimes.
Yeah. But it is difficult, and it is also difficult to discover, I think, that structure is necessary for creativity, because there's a lot of mythology around creativity that encourages you to think that you're just going to, you know, let the muse arrive and we just sit around till the muse turns up. And of course, the muse is never going to turn up unless you put the structure in place for that.
Exactly. And I think, you know, we often think of that, this mysterious muse thing or whatever, you know, this inspiration that we're trying to catch, and that we have to have the space and time to be creative, or we won't write the songs. And actually, I find the opposite. I find if I do that, I'm just not productive if I sit around trying to be creative all the time. If I'm forced into structured times for creativity and I have tools to access the muse or the inspiration, I find that works much better for me, even as a naturally wild person.
I remember reading years ago an interview with Madonna where she talked about how she scheduled creative time to write, and the interviewer was like, what do you mean? Like, how can that? And to her, it was completely natural. I'm thinking, well, yeah, because she's Madonna and she has a lot to get done in the day, but it works. Like, she got out these hit songs, and that was a perfectly good method. But even at that time, there was a lot of incredulity that anyone could do that.
Yeah, and it still is. And I think so I just finished working actually at the Academy, the Country Music Academy, which was amazing. It was my first time mentoring there. And I think that was the conversation that I had the most was that, like, how do you manage, or how do we manage? So they were asking me how they manage working a 9 to 5 and being a creative, and, you know, not missing the time to be creative, because how could they be in their 9 to 5 job and then they get an idea for a song and they have to, you know, go and work the checkout or whatever. And I said, but you have to be able to schedule time to be creative. It's like, I think it comes with experience and time, though, that you realize that you're better in those moments than you are when you just, yeah. But it's an interesting concept, and it probably doesn't work for everyone. You know what? There's probably people who do live in the bush and forest and creative 24 hours a day, and good for them. That's great too.
Yes. They mightn't have too many other things on their to-do list is part of it.
That's right.
Now, the last track on the album is titled, again, ironically, Great Australian Dream. I'm wondering what your Great Australian Dream is.
Well, contrary to the fact that we've just been talking about all the structure in my life, Michael and I actually have a dream at the moment to get a little bit of land and have a nice little place out somewhere with a bit of land and a lovely school for our kids, and be able to continue doing the music that we do. That's our personal dream. That I hope, you know, I don't feel like that's too far away for us. I feel like we're getting closer and closer to it all the time. So That's kind of nice.
Presumably studio space on that piece of land, since
Of
your
course.
husband is also a producer. Yes.
Of course.
Now, and speaking of production and making music, you posted on social media 2 audio clips of The Outskirts. One was the demo and one was the finished product. And there are technical processes that go on to translate one to the other, but I think there's also a bit of magic and instinct that goes into that. So I'm wondering, 3 albums in, do you trust your instincts more now than you ever have? Or does becoming a performing artist, a working artist, take you away from them?
That's so interesting. I feel like that's another one of those like kind of constant battles between like trusting your instincts and wanting to be technically better and greater and more advanced. But for me, making records and production and being in the studio is all about the instincts and trusting the people that you're with and trusting that you're making your music. I think the biggest mistake that we make in the studio is rocking into a studio with 100 reference tracks and going, I want this song to sound like this and I want this song to sound like that. Because then you're not trusting the instinct and trusting the magic of what's going to happen if you just let the song be the song.
Yeah.
And I think that I only learned that after 2 Kids in a Radio and working with Nielsen Hubbard. Michael and I had definitely a different approach to making records before we made that record. So then doing that with Nielsen kind of shaped our idea of being more trusting and more instinctual. Right. And going into this record, it was just this full-fledged, everyone in the studio trusted that we were going to sit in the room and magic was going to happen. And it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. But I'm also wondering, since so many of these songs were just solo writes by you, whether you felt differently about the interpretation of them than you might have if you had co-writers.
Yeah. I did. I definitely felt more protective of these songs than I had felt about any other songs I've ever written. In fact, my original plan for this record was just to record it with Michael and I, right? Because I felt the songs were so personal. I didn't want anyone else like touching them. Like I didn't want anyone else putting any of their artistry on them. I wanted them to just be Michael and I. But I changed my mind after I had a conversation with Nielsen, who worked on 2 Kids, and he responded to the songs with such heart. I felt like he really got them. And I realized that there was no way that they were going to come in and, hammer my song. It was going to still be this beautiful, tender process. But yeah, I was in the studio. I definitely spoke up more about what I wanted than I ever have before for lots of reasons, but mostly, because the songs are very personal.
Yeah. And now, do your children like your music, or are they like Wiggles only? Forget it.
They do like it, actually. Yeah, they do. My son would like to pretend that he doesn't because he's too cool for school, and he loves like grunge and like weird alternative shoegaze and things like that. But he just said to me this morning, actually, we're watching the clip for Jesus Here, which is coming out soon, and he said to me, oh, Mum, I just can't wait for this record to come out. I just can't wait for people to hear it. Oh, that's so sweet.
So maybe he's been secretly listening all this time.
Well, words, he knows all the words and he sings along. And my daughter always we do this thing in the car where everyone gets a song. So when it's, we take turns to choose what we do. And she quite often asks for my songs. So I guess she likes them.
Well, they do have great hooks in them, melodic hooks in them as well, which I know kids respond to. So there you go. Now, I did want to ask if you're aware that on Australia All Over on Sunday mornings, Ian McDonald plays Last Cigarette pretty much every week.
Every week? I wasn't aware.
So because I don't listen to it that show the whole way through, but pretty much every time I dip in for an hour or so, that song gets played. I'm like, I think he's playing this every week.
That is pretty amazing and really special to me, because I remember growing up having the CDs that he would release, and they were compilations, and it must have been every year or whatever he would release a compilation, and we used to listen to them on road trips and absolutely love them. So that is pretty special. I knew that he'd played it, but I didn't know that he was a fan.
And every time he plays it, he's like, I just love this song. Just love this song. So there you go.
That's so lovely. I love that.
So Ian Macca may want to talk to you about your new album. Who knows?
So let's hook him in. He can have a chat.
Exactly. Now, one last question, because you have things to do in your day, is with 3 kids and you took them on the road before. It's a lot of logistics if you're planning to tour this album. Are you at any stage thinking of doing some shows?
Yeah, we actually had planned with 2 kids and a radio to do a full band tour, but then obviously COVID.
Yeah.
And so we rejigged our plans around that, but that's what we are doing with this record. So we have a new band on board, and like I've finally sort of got my own band rather than just using session players, which I mean, I love session players, but I wanted to have a band that felt like we were a team making music together all the time. So I've brought a new band on board and we are hitting the road, and that tour is going to be really soon.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure the songs will be as great live as recorded, but everyone should listen to the album because it is wonderful. Melody, congratulations, and thanks for talking to me.
Oh, thank you so much.